Welcome to the First 90 podcast, where we discuss strategies to improve your employee onboarding. Today, we're talking with Gaurav from Easini. Easini's mission is to help companies build cultures of growth where people can thrive. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. Let's start by helping people understand you and your background. Tell us about your very first job that you had.
My very first job was a Linux professor for a management institute back in New Bombay in 2000.
Do you remember the first day at all when you got this job? What was the first day like?
Oh, wow. So the very first day, I vaguely recall riding my little Honda motorcycle all the way to the institute and meet up with the head of department. That was my superior who hired me. And we went through the schedule. He told me about the two different locations that I'll be teaching the Linux as an operating system to MBA students. And he then showed me the lab where we had the computers, and then I got right into it, setting up my Linux lab and starting to wonder what my future is going to be like.
You get thrown into this role. You're a new teacher. You're put into here, and you're just kind of thrown in on your first day. And then it was up to you to figure out what to do after that. Is that right?
Truly, I didn't have any information, but if I start to look at how I would approach joining a company today, I was really there was no conversation about what the organization purpose was. There was nothing about who I need to work with, who I need to shadow with, or even anything related to the institute as a whole. Just this is it.
What's interesting about these stories is it's stuff that you probably pull from now with your coaching and helping companies develop culture. And so it's interesting taking experiences that were maybe a little less than ideal when we first started or in previous roles, that you now can take that and help companies develop healthy patterns to help new employees.
Indeed. Exactly.
So we've been talking, and I've been following you on LinkedIn for a bit here, and there's this concept you talk about that I love and why I wanted to have you on the podcast called bright spots. So let's first define what is a bright spot within an organization.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. I appreciate that you like my content and it resonates with you. So I take heavy inspiration from this book called Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. And what they talk about in the book for bright spots is these are successful efforts worth emulating. So think about unique and successful practices done by a very few in an environment where they're facing the same kind of constraints as well as lack of resources. So in an organization, you think about, let's say, a team that submits their expense reports on time, right? And another delivery team that has great customer satisfaction day, project after project. A dynamic, agile, customer-facing team which has a customer stickiness, the maximum customer stickiness in the organization, right? Or a sales team which has great success in bringing in new logos. So when one starts to identify these practices and create steps to replicate them, it becomes a bright spot. The bright spots are they demonstrate what is possible, and they help us to understand that positive change is achievable and it's replicable, right? In an organization, if you talk about culture or driving culture change, it's met with a lot of resistance, skepticism, and even like the uncertainties around the outcome, right? But bright spots could be tangible proof that positive change is possible and we can achieve it.
So if we were looking at a team within an organization or an individual, a bright spot basically is someone who stands out. Even though they're doing the same job or the same procedures, they're doing it way above what everyone else is. And so we want to identify what caused that chain of events or that performance change and be able to replicate that with other employees or other teams, correct?
Absolutely. Spot on.
So how can we then, this is about employee onboarding. How then can we use bright spots with employee onboarding?
It's a very crucial point in time for an individual who is joining a new company. So they've already had first look of your culture during the hiring process. But during the onboarding process is your chance to help them understand what is the implicit and explicit organizational culture. And of course, you have to maintain a little bit of balance in the amount of information that you pass on to the individual. So if you talk about onboarding for an organization and think about bright spots, I would recommend looking into, let's say, what have been the past best practices. If you look at high performing individuals and you
Hmm.
understand what they have gone through, or if their understanding of organizational culture or their understanding of how they need to benefit or help the organization, you will be able to understand from them that, okay, what were the good practices that enable them to succeed in this in the organization. So you can go back and try to replicate that for newer individuals, and of course have a continuous feedback, right? So about maybe think about 6 months down the line for a new employee, you get to ask them, do you are you aware of what your work is, what your role is, what can you find out where you need information from? Those simple answers can help you understand that your onboarding was a great success.
I love this. I had identified it in the terminology of bright spots before, but when I wrote my book, Every Product Manager's First 90 Days, it was basically the story of a bright spot because I tell a story in there of two product managers that I was hiring. One ended up being successful, one did not after 6 months. And I was able to look back after that time period and see, okay, what happened in their first 90 days that ended up making one person an incredible employee and one person where they really struggled to get going inside the company, and that was
Fantastic.
a bright spot. So
Fantastic.
yeah.
I'll remember this post by this lady who talks about bright spots as the work of innovators for early adopters, but it's really a work of innovators. They're really limited with resources, but then they have possibly a positive outlook towards finding a best solution for themselves.
So it's great to have these concepts and these ideas of what we want to create, but let's bring it down to metrics. What have you seen? What's the business impact of creating bright spots? What have you seen with people changing their culture because of bright spots, and what's the outcome that you've experienced?
That's another great question. I'll tell you everything. Most of your questions are awesome. If we talk about culture as a way of doing things, um, and I take from my personal experience, I go back to my past company, and there were a couple of engagements that I had with two customers. So I had two customers, and each of them were lasting about 3+ years of engagement. And this is a big deal because our contracts were not more than 3 to 4 months. So we were
Mm.
looking at sequential or sometimes even multiple contracts with them. But when we executed the delivery, our delivery approach was Scrum methodologies and Agile principles, right? We were governed by that. We became a bright spots for these organizations, and we actually saw over the period of time how they saw us as a bright spots and used our best practices to implement in their execution style. And what helped them achieve was certain aspects of better collaboration within and externally, right?
Mm.
Uh, Less frustration because they know what they need to do. Um, Making work visible, that was a big one for one of our customers. They had so much work going on, and when we came from that practices like DevOps consultancy, and it was a big thing, and everyone's trying to get into it. It was a lot of unknowns, and
Yeah.
so they liked the way we executed, and they implemented that and made changes to their organize
Yeah.
organization culture.
That's incredible to hear. So there's one other topic related to bright spots that you mention in your writing. It's called shadow systems. And I think it's related to bright spots, but help me understand, what are shadow systems?
Shadow systems, to me, they're kind of bright spots, but they're really hidden. Um, Shadow systems was a term coined by Ralph Stacey in 1997, and he was a British organizational theorist and a professor of management. He was also a pioneer of inquiring into the implications of natural science of complexity and understanding how human organization and management are impacted through that. That really makes him my personal hero because that's what we are all about. We are a student of complexity of science, and we want to use it to gain better results for all stakeholders, for our customers. Shadow systems is really work being done outside the formal boundaries set by organizations, as per Ralph Stacey. So all organizations have rules and regulations and policies, and what you can really consider those rules and regulations are red tape, right? If you think about being agile, these things are really aspects that make it rigid and creates conditions where an organization can fail to seize opportunities as they arise. How do shadow systems emerge, one would ask, right? Well, some innovative or creative members of the organizations would realize that these rules and policies won't really allow us to get to where we want to go. So they say, to heck with these rules. Let's do something different. Let's do something creative. Let's get our work done, but let's keep it in the shadows.
Hmm.
Now, what we say is that these are successful, unique activities that already exist in the shadows. Well, you can, when you bring them into the light, that can help you, first of all, make your organization agile and also help you to change, bring about change in the organization.
For someone that's listening, they've been hearing about bright spots and shadow systems, and they think this is great. I understand the value here. I want to replicate this with my organization. What advice would you give for someone to start using this, to start thinking about bright spots and how to identify them within their organization?
I will quote the book over here again. Bright spots, if you learn to recognize them and understand them, you will solve one of the fundamental mysteries of change. What exactly needs to be done differently? So, my first advice, start practicing identifying these bright spots. Now, if you're to if you were to tie scaling the organizational culture with onboarding, I would say look at your current employee bright spots, right? High performers with a growth mindset. What made them not just an easy fit, but also an enhancing superpower for your organizational culture? Try to replicate those actions as part of your first 90 days of onboarding time.
Well, thank you for all of this. I think all of this is really practical and a great way for people to start thinking about their employee onboarding and starting to think about bright spots and what impact that can have on their organization. We've reached our final two questions here. What book do you recommend most to people, and what TV show are you watching right now? Outside of helping companies develop better culture.
Well, if you haven't guessed already, Switch is definitely my favorite book, and Star Trek Voyager. I know I'm going showing my age, and I'm going back old stuff, but that's what I'm watching.
That's great. I've had multiple people recommend Switch to me. It's actually on my bookshelf, so it might be time to finally get to it and prioritize reading that over the next month. Last question: where can people find you online, and how can they connect with you?
Well, it's quite easy. Just search any of these LinkedIn, Google, or Bing, and search for EASINI, and you will find us.
Great. Thanks for coming on the
Otherwise,
podcast. Really enjoyed this conversation.
same. Thank you.